Hello, Something Guys and Gals, this is Something Guy 912, back once again to cover a Team Fortress 2 map after having completed the Red Letter Day chapter of maps. Originally, the plan was that I was going to cover CTF_2 Fort as the next in line of the on-launch TF2 maps, but given the growing reception of this series now, I gave the option of the audience to choose for me. Nevertheless, they still wanted me to cover CTF_2 Fort, and covered it I shall. Again, if you aren't aware, especially for multiplayer games like this, I cover the game's map design in accordance to how realistic it is, regardless of whether it is necessarily designed for gameplay. The more I do this, the more that I will get comments wondering why I'm going about this, and the reason has a lot to do with my own personal experience taking photographs of very peculiar stuff and learning a lot about it, as well as the curiosity regarding the design process of maps in regards to how much it belabors on reality. With that out of the way, let's transition once more. Alright, and now that we have transitioned into CTF2 Fort, a few more clarifications before we start. I do understand that CTF2 Fort is designed off the original CTF2 Fort from Team Fortress Classic, so they had to take a lot of the design cues from that map and design it in a way that kind of more coincides with the style of Team Fortress 2. So obviously, certain nuances of the design is still going to be something of my concern, even knowing that they had to essentially contort it with within regards to the design from the original maps. Same with CP Dust Bowl. I forgot to mention that when I covered that map. Second thing too is that while the red and blue side are asymmetrically designed for gameplay sakes, there are nuances and differences between the architectural oddities that I find between both sides, which is why I'm going to cover the red side all on its own, then cover the blue side and notice some of the similarities and differences between the two. And the third thing is there's going to be some textural problems. Like, for some reason when I loaded up this map on Gmod, some of the textures get swapped for the Half-Life 2 textures, and it's especially bad on the blue side. I don't know why it does this. It's not that I'm missing any textures. I guess it just decided to prioritize one or the other. So with that out of the way, we'll start with red. Into red's left spawn, and it's mostly cohesive for the most part. The only thing I find a little bit weird is this choice of vent, or this gap to a lot offense here. Like, I don't see why this couldn't have just been paved over with concrete and then have a vent be built inside of the gap, or inside of the concrete. It's just weird to have a gap to facilitate that. Anyhow, going into the top part of red's bunk, or whatever you want to call it. We see a familiar texture, these double padlock doors. If you remember watching my CP Dust Bowl vid, I pointed out a set of padlock doors at the top of red's first spawn in stage 1 that did coincide with this granary system that was jutting above it. But as opposed to that, with this one, there's not any space for a padlock to fit anything in here, because this is as much space as it has to work with. So yeah, a little bit odd that that's there. And then to the right of that, or across from it, we have the doorway into Spiral, and we have this fence grate thing, or vent grate fan thing that is not powered by anything, nor would be even powered by things like the wind, given where it's located. So it's just, odd that it's there. And then to adjacent from that, we have the doorway into drop down, and we have this giant crane, which is a cool feature, but I feel like this would probably not get a lot of use, considering the drop down and the doorways into the main entrance are really tight for a vehicle to fit in. They better get some excellent drifting skills to be able to move a truck in such a way to collect or haul off stuff onto this crane. So yeah. And then going back to the front of red's left spawn, we have these shelves here that are way too high up for anyone to really want to store anything, and more baffling as to how they even stored these barrels onto here. It's just interesting how that works. And then going off into battlements, we have this air grate, which would collide if it hypothetically had like a vent going into it, would collide with these hay bales and barrels that are also fenced off and inaccessible for some reason. So again, just a funny thing with that. And then inside the little cubby of the battlements, we have this giant hollowed out tower that isn't really doing anything, and hypothetically it probably should be doing something because there's this chute here. It implies that either this gets filled up and then it, like, you know, pulls into this, or this fills up out through the chute and then dumps it here, but it'd be dumping into an otherwise empty, hollowed out area that supposedly people are supposed to walk around in. So yeah, a little bit odd that it's designed like that. And then before we go into Red's right spawn, we have more of these little tiny elevated windows, similar to Red's, similar to CP Dust Bowl's design in terms of like the barnyard like aesthetic, especially given that Red it really has this more like homely barnyard like pastoral design to it compared to Blue. And then going into Red's right spawn, same design philosophy applies here to the left side. The only thing that as an extra that is a little bit odd is the split between these two doorways. Like, you would think that it would just have, you would just have a single doorway and then just that doorway jut into the hallway here, as opposed to just these two separate hallways, but whatever. And then speaking of, we'll drop down into the hallway. And then we'll go over here. We have some racks with some tools, some hubcaps. And then we have these slightly elevated fences, or wooden fences, I don't know what you would call them. And they kind of remind me of horse stables, since like normally these would be designed for a horse's head to kind of poke out from the top, but not be so low that a horse could jump over it. But obviously the gap between here would not be wide enough for a horse to fit in, so it's a little bit odd that they're designed like this. Not to mention, even if a horse could get in here, I don't know how they would be able to get it out, considering there's no like door, there's no obvious door here. So moving on, before we go into courtyard, we'll mention this door, this padlock. There's a lot of these like padlocks sprinkled out throughout Red's side that could go somewhere, but don't really go anywhere. Like this one, there's one back here near the drop-off that goes nowhere, could go somewhere, and just obviously, you know, they can't really focus on things like that since it's going to be out of the player's view anyway. So going into Red's side entrance, we have this interesting wooden fence with a gate door blocking off, which is also blocked off by a shutter gate similar to the spawn doors, which I find really interesting since this design philosophy is not carried over on the Blue side. What is odd though is, so you have this ramp that goes into the shutter gate, but then you have this weird lip. Like, presumably, like, a truck could, like, drive in here, but then it has to deal with this weird lip. And then you also have this weird, like, distillery thing, or, like, slough, or whatever you want to call it, that's also kind of in the way of this. So it's just odd. And then opposite from that, we have more of these wooden fences that, again, wouldn't be able to accommodate a horse in them. So, again, very odd to even have this gap out here. Anyhow, moving on, we have this all covered. There's not really much to say about the drop-down itself or the two main doorways. Like, there's nothing really out of the ordinary. And then we'll go out into the courtyard, which has probably the most interesting design element that I find about CTF-24 is these giant fences that are blocking the main two walkways, or at least this side of the walkway, not really this one. And what I find kind of interesting is, while this map did try to take a lot of the design cues from the original 2 what it didn't take was, in the middle here, there's like this walkway that goes from here, and I think crosses through that way. In addition to everything else, like I think this was just like a single ramp that goes down in the original 2 but they just cut this out for more of an open walkway, and obviously it wouldn't really make sense for there just to be this middle walkway here. But given that the rest of this map doesn't really coincide with reality, I think that's a little bit of a moot point. Still, a little bit a little bit odd that they didn't take all the cues from the original 2 for it. And then barring from that, we have this garage that is outside of bounds with more of these shutter gates. And noting the width of them, given that this is the only like walkway that you could hypothetically reach here, like by normal means instead of like having to climb over, I don't see why this walkway would be shorter in width than the shutter gate, which would presumably have a vehicle. Like this vehicle, for example, to drive into, if that's even the point of this. And then opposite here, we just have, you know, a piece of the barn house and like this weird loft tower thing with a cow, and then the rest of it is not particularly well detailed because obviously you weren't supposed to see it. Now, the building that leads into stairs is mostly cohesive as in terms of looking like a barn. I think it's supposed to give the facade that it looks like a barn, to hide the fact that there's an intelligence, although it's not really doing a good job of it, considering the restricted area sign and the intelligence sign on the right of it. But I guess, you know, you can just lend that to the idea of just keeping the gameplay mostly cogent so that, like, a player on the opposite team knows what they're supposed to do. Regardless, I do think the sign, compared to a lot of signs that are just kind of randomly sprinkled about, would actually make sense for it to be here, compared to other signs. There was a sign back when we were at the battlements, I forgot to mention, that just says, like, warning unsafe structure, and I don't know what it's supposed to be alluding to. Like, is it talking about the hollowed out tower, or the doorways? Like, it's not really clear. So anyway, going down into the stairs, into the resupply, or the third resupply, again, it's designed basically similarly to the left and right side of Red Spawn, save for the fact that there's a lot more pipes here that just are kind of put in to just add more depth to this resupply. Isn't it interesting that you can't respawn here in the off chance that somebody's like chasing for the intelligence? I mean, you can go in here as red. It's just, I always thought that was a little bit odd, since the original 2 you could do that. Regardless, this is not about gameplay. This is about design, damn it. So going into the basement, we have a very over-engineered design, I would say. Like, not poorly designed, just over-engineered. Because you have these steel girders that are lining up almost exactly with this oddly sloped, like, concrete roofing that's also got these weird indentations for the vents. And then the vents themselves are holding lights that just so happen to be on cue for these girders. And it's really tight. Like, this is like the amount of like multiple steps you would have to make get to have this to work out perfectly would just be really, it'd be a logistical nightmare. Because, like, look at this. Like, look at the gap between this like console and the slope of this roof here, as well as these pipes. Like they're getting every inch they can out of the underground area. Presumably this was probably hollowed out and built around it with these rocks here. These lights kind of remind me of they remind me of zoo lights. Like, not necessarily for like an exhibition, but like certain caves, like cave tunnels that I've seen in zoos will have these like little lights to light the area for like exploring and whatnot. So I find that a little bit interesting, considering you have these lights up here, so I don't know why you would have these lights down there. As another aside, the intelligence room, for some reason, the textures for the windows make it so that they're just completely blacked out. So I'm going to have to just go through them to show you some of the interesting things that I found with them. And the main thing that I find is that a lot of them, there's no way to get to them. Like, for example, this window up here has this conference room that there's no way to get to. There's no doorway, and there's not really a conceivable way that like somebody would get up here. You have this window going into the giant like console room and whatnot that again doesn't really have a way to go into it. And I find interesting is that they designed this like hallway here that would be the entrance to here to give you kind of an idea that there would be a way, but again, there's not really a way. There's not like a set of stairs or another just door off in the corner. Like you have this little upper bunk of like doohickeys or whatever that again don't have a way to get to them. It's just yeah, a lot of these do not have a through line. And another example of this is this little booth here with these printers that has this doorway that again would essentially go nowhere and doesn't really have a way to go anywhere. So how would anyone get in? Who knows? So with that, we'll go back up to Spiral, and again, the textures are all higgledy-piggledy for whatever reason. Now, I do find the design of the Spiral to be a little bit weird. Like, I don't know why you would design the Spiral like this. I mean, obviously it's for gameplay sakes, but whether I find it weird and whether it would work is another thing entirely. And I think this would work because it doesn't really collide with anything, as you can see from me clipping out. Like, it nearly clips with the hallway here, but no, it makes sense for it to be designed this way. Like, it's not clipping with anything. Although what doesn't make sense in Spiral is the last window booth here, which, like the rest of them, doesn't go anywhere. And it's even fully designed, like it's fully modeled to essentially have nowhere to go. Like, as opposed to the other ones where they don't finish from where they start off, or where they design off. Like, this one just, no, there's no way. It's basically a dead end. But there's just essentially no end in sight. So with that, we can go back to dropping down and going into the sewer entrance, or sewer exits. And the sewer exits are mostly fine. I don't think there's anything really out of the ordinary with the design of this. Although what is weird is the design of the sewers themselves. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a sneaking suspicion that the sewers probably get a lot higher in terms of their water as opposed to this, because you can see these stain lines here to imply that the water gets considerably higher. So if the water gets higher, why would you design things that have like this door, you have this intercom button system, and you have these weird doohickey consoles if it's just going to get flooded out? And it's just funny that there's this fire extinguisher in an area that's usually flooded with water. It's like what fire is going to? Well, I guess there'd be electrical fire from the water, short circuiting all these consoles. I guess. I mean, I guess that was a mistake on their part to design it that way. But yeah, I just always thought that was a little bit weird. And then going out from the sewers themselves, we'll go back out into the main battlements, which the main battlements are blocked by a huge set of fences and grates down below into the sewers. Although, this side of red has gates. I mean, the blue side does too, but we'll get to that. Blue is a little bit of a curious subject in that. Like, you have these gates. Like, you have the padlock and the gates to allow like vehicles or other transport to get through, because you have this road here and then you have this truck here. So obviously this would make sense for this to be fenced off and not just be fenced off for the sake of gameplay's sake. And then through here you have this the metal like girders or whatnot are like presumably they would be damming the sewer or canal, because you can see it's a little bit dried out. because there's like supposed to be water that's supposed to seep in through here, and it's just not funneling through. It just kind of ends right here, especially given the fact that, I mean, if this is dammed out, like, you'd think the water level would be considerably higher, but it's relatively low. So, you know, I guess this is a really real dry bed of a map in terms of its humidity. And then going out to here, you have these giant tankers. Now there's like a set of 6, but the problem is, as you can already tell, if it's not obvious, is you have this weird, like, it's almost like somebody just slapped a Lego block on top of this, because this is not doing anything. This is not doing anything in terms of like design or whatnot. And not to mention, these tankers aren't even fully modeled. Like, the front 2 are? Or, no, not even the front 2. Like, most of them aren't modeled because, as you can tell, if they were modeled, they'd be jutting right into the sewer exits, Red's left spawn, and parts of the battlement. Like, as you can see. Like, if they were fully modeled, they'd be getting in the way. So it just kind of gives you the impression that there's 6 of them here, but there's really, like, 2.5, if that. And that is about it for Red's side of the map. One more thing I do want to point out is with the bridge, you have a watch your step sign. You know, just again, why would this be here? Like, obviously I would want to walk on this bridge. Like, you would have a watch your step sign for here, but not for an area where it's safe to pass. Like, yeah, I don't want to fall off into the sewer, but I wouldn't do that because I just walk on this bridge. So what am I watching for while walking on this bridge? And with that, I'll take a quick break, clear my breath, because this was my second take doing this, and we will proceed with the blue side. Alright, and now we go and transition into the blue side, and as you can tell, the textures are really off. Again, it's using Half-Life 2 textures for whatever reason, but blues spawns for the left and right are basically the same as reds. I think the only major difference between the two is the choice of calendar, as you'll discover. Other similarities is the padlock here, although I will say that it's positioned slightly differently, because red's padlock door was here, whereas this padlock is here, but same inconsistency applies, as well as this vent grate thing, and the dead-end window to spiral. And as for the drop-down, or before the drop-down, as opposed to a crane, we have the set of barrels on this lofty set of boards that would be basically inaccessible. I don't know how somebody's got up here and stored them. I don't know why they would do that, but nevertheless, they are here. But hey, you know, at least the watch your step sign here actually makes sense, considering you would not want to accidentally drop down from here if you were trying to watch your step. Going in from the battlements, as opposed to red's weird vent thing, there is no vent here. It's just a sign that says caution, no trespassing, which makes a bit more sense to be here than the other sign from red's side of the battlements. And then blue's cubby is more of a slanted roof rather than a like extremely tall like tower. So this makes a little bit more sense. And then going into blue's battlements, or left spawn, same thing applies. It's basically designed the same as red's left spawn. And again, they're basically the same. You know, just ignore the weird like anachronism with the texturing, because like I said, that's not the actual textures of this spawn. And the only actual major difference is the choice of calendar, because the pinup girl is in blue, whereas the pinup girl in red spawn is red, obviously. So going down for the drop down, as opposed to red's choice to have these pseudo horse stables, blue opts to have meshes storing the tools and whatnot and barrels, but no way to get to them. So good going there, I guess, because I don't know how you would be able to access this if you needed any of this. So anyhow, before we go into courtyard, something that is interesting is there's no door here, as opposed to Red's, and I think Blue doesn't have this door here before drop down, so that's interesting that Blue doesn't have that. So going into the side entrance, as opposed to Red's extremely like over-engineered design with the shutter gate, Blue just has this propane or tanker that is blocked off by a fence, as well as this set of I don't know, propane tanks and this like it kind of looks like a generator or something like that, or a giant battery that's also blocked off by a fence, so no door or anything like that to access it, so they're kind of just useless, which is weird because you have this, you know, propane tank here, but those other ones are blocked off for whatever reason. And then we have this interesting wash basin with a hose and some shelves that, once again, are a little too high for somebody to want to stow anything on them. And I think Red's was a set of like shelves with some like barrels and tires and whatnot. It's a little bit more conceivable than this design, but still. And then again, this is mostly the same. Like, there might be some nuances with the design, like the placements of like these rims in the box, but they're more or less the same. As well as this. I mean, this is obviously conveyed by something different. It's like a set of tires and I think it's like a milk jug, as opposed to just a few barrels and this kerosene tank. But that's not the thing I want to point out, because obviously the real bread and butter is, again, the courtyard with the two sets of inexplicable fencing. And as opposed to Red's choice to hide the intel room with a barn house, Blue goes for kind of this silo design, which gives it a much more hollow look, as you can see. You can see partly from outside. We'll get to some interesting things I found from the other side of this in a moment. Now, what is interesting is, as opposed to the weird garage setup, with this set of like two like side doors, like, it would make sense in a way that, you know, somebody would be able to normally walk through here and want to access this and whatnot. Considering that, well, obviously this is not textured at all, but if it was, it probably would have something here, and it wouldn't really collide with anything. What is interesting is this, you know, this non-existent side of the silo has this chute that would be shooting out nothing into this weird facility. And then just to the right of that is another chute that is shooting nothing. Like, it ends here, and it just peters out here. So what the hell is this even shooting? You know, like it would be dumping into something, but it's just nothing. It's absolutely nothing. And you can see this just clear as day. So that's just interesting to me. And then we have this weird, it kind of reminds me of the weird like granary dispenser thing that was in stage 3 of CP Dust Bowl, just more laid bare rather than being hidden by like covered by the weird battlement design. Same applies to this side. Again, obviously this is not exactly all that there and all that there in terms of texture, because obviously you're not supposed to see behind that, but nonetheless it's a little bit weird that this fence would be here, since this is all that it's guarding, would be this weird alleyway thing. So, interestingly, despite Blue having the correct signs for certain places in the battlements, it decides to have the anachronistic warning unsafe structure sign in the stairs, as opposed to the restricted area sign in the stairs on Red's side of CTF-24. So going down, the third resupply, again, more or less the same. in terms of all the pipe placements, lighting, fire hose, whatever. And the same problems and overt engineering design of Blue's basement also apply here. With, again, this booth going nowhere, this really tight gap between the console and the pipes, the steel buttresses, like, have to be designed in a very specific way, and this sloping roof and whatnot, like, all of it apply here. I don't think there's really any difference other than the fact that it's blue instead of red, you know. So I don't think there's really much else I can really say about this that wouldn't be me just being redundant. So with that, we will go up in the spiral, and again, the texture is all wonky, and same thing applies here, where I think it's a little bit weird to design a spiral like this, but again, it doesn't collide with anything. It doesn't necessarily not make sense, you know, especially given that it's like supposedly top secret with the fact that there's this like bank safe door that's just kind of out in the open like that. So with that, we will go into the sewers, sewer exit and sewers, and like with reds, blues, sewer exits makes sense, but the sewers themselves do not because of the aforementioned fact that the water rises much higher than what it currently is at and would probably fry and short circuit a lot of the stuff here. Even though, what is interesting noticing now is blue doesn't have that weird intercom thing, like right next to this keep out door, despite red having that. So that's a little bit interesting. So going out from the sewers and onto the main battlefield. Now, unlike Red's, which is blocked by two fences with a gate, Blue opts to have one side guarded by a fence with a gate, and the other side having a train, or like a set of boards blocked by a train. You can kind of hear the acoustics too. It makes it sound like the train is still running, like currently running. And the blue side is also more packed with dark gravel and this rail system, which is pretty interesting. And, you know, I got this weird, like, checkpoint watchtower thing. But unfortunately, even though this is all cool and whatnot, as you can see from this gate, it's about this wide, right? Now, look at the width of this train. If I stand right here and I go back perfectly like this, and then I turn around 90 degrees, the train is going to destroy this fence, even if this is open. Like, it's going to collide right with the fence if this train, like, supposedly does travel through here. I mean, I would assume it would, because, you know, you have these rails here and you have these other train carts here. So it would only make sense, right? But it obviously would collide with that. And then the rest of Blue's side is mostly just more of the out-of-bounds stuff that I notice. So we have these cables here. They're more or less out of bounds. But what I do find interesting is the cables are mostly a facet of Blue's side. But yet you have these cables that jut out onto Red's side right here. And it kind of gives a little bit of a narrative implication about Red and Blue here, considering they're always like they're always split down the middle in terms of like the map design, that you would have this incongruity here. And I guess like somebody just thought like, oh well, it obviously would make sense to have this here next to this set of wires and whatnot. It's just interesting. Another interesting thing about this pole is you see you have these poles with these stumps, and I think these are stumps to allow workers to climb up them. And the same problem with this train colliding into things applies to this cable, because if I stand right here, I think I'm vaguely 90 degrees to it. If I back up, yeah, I'm gonna collide, like the train's going to collide with this cable. It's gonna knock it down. So it kind of makes you wonder how the hell this train even got here without colliding into that cable. And the obvious answer is they designed the train without that in mind. And then more out of bounds things that you can see is you have another chute that is shooting nothing. Like, it's filling in nothing and it's draining nothing. Like, it's not even in a spot where it would hypothetically like drain something into a cart on this train. Considering this is where like the lip ends, as well as this top part here. Although what is interesting is these tankers here do not collide with anything compared to Red's tankers on the left side here. Obviously, the left building here is not really well conveyed by anything. Like, it's essentially just blank. But, I mean, I suppose I would prefer blank over actively, like, colliding with stuff, and they had to essentially cut, like, certain features of the tankers out. Unfortunately, the tanker problem does apply to the right side of blue spawn. And not only that, but like with the furnace in the third stage of CP Dust Bowl, these tankers do not exist. Like, if I run into them, or if I try to get to them, it just, they disappear and it shows me more of the skybox. So they're just skybox items rather than, like, actually being in the game. Like, this is the only tanker that's actually here. And this tanker is partially designed because it would collide directly with Blue's left spawn. So it has the same problem with the tankers on Red's right spawn. And that is about it for Blue's side, and almost about it for CTF2 Fort. The last thing I gotta bring up is obviously the bridge itself, and the bridge makes sense. Like, there's not anything out of the ordinary with this. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, obviously there's gaps and whatnot, and it's interesting that it's painted red. Like, there's not a lot of blue to go with it. I figured that this would be mostly neutral colors, but I suppose the walkway and the railing is mostly neutral colors. But regardless, that is it for CTF2 Fort. And that was that with CTF_2 Fort. Again, quite a heft of stuff to discover from both sides of the teams, as well as trying to wedge the classic version with the more 1960s aesthetic coated over, but still nonetheless fun to do. I have another video about a completely different subject that I got working in the back, but once that is done, we can go right back to Half-Life 2, and with the anniversary edition in mind, no less.